In 1986, a preppy underdog studio called Fromsoftware was founded in Japan. They made their first steps into games with the 1994 release of King's Field on the PlayStation. And from then until around the mid-2000s, they were relatively unknown in the West. They made numerous games that I hadn't heard of until digging into them for this. Fromsoftware dabbled in a few genres with mixed success, mostly hidden in the shadows cast by studios like Konami and Square, who were storming the Western world. For much of the late 90s and early 2000s, the success of a series called Armored Core, which had managed to get some global success, carried them forward. In the late 2000s, they had a desire to return to their roots and take another stab at the fantasy action RPG style game. The development was troubled, however, a figure who had joined in 2004 and would become pivotal to the company's future success took control. Hidetaka Miyazaki was a fan of the King's Field series, and in particular, the setting and the difficulty, and this is what he took forward in forging Demon Souls, a fantasy RPG game that I must admit I paid no attention to, as I was, for my shame, an addict at the time. And it was on PS3, a console which, like many, I had been put off by their price point blunder.
The 20GB PlayStation 3 will retail for $499 US and 549 Canadian dollars. And the 60GB PlayStation 3 for $599 US, $659 Canadian.
However, Demon Souls was critically acclaimed worldwide, and this gave Miyazaki an open road to create Dark Souls. In 2012, whilst most people were doing this, and I had stopped chasing the Cataclysm Dragon, Dark Souls Prepare to Die Edition was released on a system that I do have, and I purchased it. End of video, and I loved it as well as all the follow-ups, right? Well, no. I put maybe 2 hours into the game before stopping, and for a decade it gathered digital dust as a footnote in my Steam library. Why would I ditch such a beloved gem? I hear people politely asking and not at all throwing hateful insults at me. Well, when I show you the directions I went, and continue to try to go, people who know the game might start to understand. I went that way, then I went that way, I never even saw that way, and yes, I am aware that if I had explored more, used my eyes, maybe even looked up a game guide, my relationship with Fromsoftware over the following 10 years would be very different. But you gotta understand, I'm an idiot. And when I was throwing myself against a wall of invulnerable ghosts and regenerating bone bros, I was thinking, it's meant to be hard. This is right next to the start hub, so it must be the right way. But wow, the difficulty between the first area and here is just insane. I thought people praising the game had to be wrong. So confounded I was by the insurmountable objects in my way. This isn't fun. It's punishment. It's sadist. I'm going to play Mass Effect 3 instead. And as time got sunk into that and other games appeared in my backlog, Dark Souls became an afterthought and eventually uninstalled. It was unfathomable to me that Dark Souls could be considered a great game. And as people in denial do, I found others who were thinking the same thing. I went on with my life comfortable in my view that Dark Souls was in fact unnecessarily difficult and not fun. I mean, who wants to bang their head against a wall for hours just to get to the bosses, let alone then have to beat them too? Over the years, seeing videos from people like Jim Stephanie Sterling mirroring my view on how they should have difficulty options, it only emboldened my view. In 2019-ish, when Bloodborne was made available on PS Plus, after it had been met by high praise, I thought, why not dip my toe again? I already have PS Plus, may as well see if it's any different. Maybe, after a few games, this plucky studio have learnt their craft and tuned the difficulty better. And it was different. It was better. I spent almost an entire Saturday playing the game. I even got slightly good at defeating some of the bigger enemies. I loved the setting and the true sense of exploration, and I started to see what people enjoy about FromSoft games. A well-crafted, interconnected world with challenging fights and genuinely interesting exploration. I spent hours learning, dying, growing, gathering. When you're my age, you have responsibilities, life things, adulting to do. So hours of a Saturday is an important and often rare chunk of time. Perhaps the only free time that you have. Then I stepped onto a bridge and a fog wall appeared behind me.
Surprise, motherfucker!
I was demolished without having had the opportunity to spend my hard-won echoes. But it was okay, I thought. I could go get them back, I thought. Right before two crows, a wolf, and a really stupid camera made sure that I had wasted my entire day. Some 6 hours of time, poof, gone, wasted, pointless. And something very rare happened. I rage quit. I don't normally go to anger. I normally go to an almost petulant whining. That made me angry. Fuck FromSoft games, I thought. These games are made by people who have no respect for people's time. How can anyone like this absolute bullshit, I thought. After that affront, my opinions on FromSoft games became more vocal. It made no sense to me that people could be so enamored by something that is very clearly broken and no good. I began to agree in spaces like Twitter with people who would criticize the games, and defend people who would suggest that they should have difficulty options and be immediately attacked for that view. I would make arguments like, they're disrespectful to people's time. Difficulty settings would be good for people who have busy lives, who love gaming, and want to experience these worlds without feeling like they've wasted their time. You don't have a chance to get good if you can only play the game for a few hours a week. I turned difficulty down for the Valkyrie Queen in God of War. Nobody's mad at me about that, so why would it matter if I turned it down for Dark Souls? Just let us enjoy the game too. In what world does it make sense to enjoy something but not want other people to enjoy it too? I even suggested that it doesn't need to be a difficulty setting, maybe something more nuanced, something different, like what Hades had. Well, FromSoft fans, they start to take notice if you besmirch the series. Now, I'm not an impolite person. My mum raised me to make points with logic rather than insults. And let me tell you, that is not a lesson that die-hard FromSoft fans were ever taught, many of whom were seemingly seeking people to tear down. Unfortunately, their militant viewpoint and string of insults only hardened my view. You introducing any system would break the whole game, I was told. And when pointing out that I'm a software engineer, and as a software engineer, you're calling FromSoftware bad at their jobs by suggesting they couldn't introduce some system to make the game more appealing to a larger audience without breaking it. Instead of that blindingly obvious logic giving them pause for thought, I was told I don't deserve to play games at all. You can't bargain with gatekeepers, unfortunately. At that point, it seemed clear to me. FromSoft fans, they see no reason. There's no point even trying to argue the case anymore. Why bother in the face of such vitriol? I want to enjoy the worlds and the stories, but I'm not allowed to, and will never be allowed to. It genuinely made me sad to see how good Sekiro looked, but to know it's not for me. Like asking for a pizza without olives and being told, you can't take the olives off, that pizza just isn't for you. Then a major life-changing global event happened in 2019. Elden Ring was announced, and boy was I unhappy. The setting looked great. It has George R.R. Martin involved. The creatures in the trailers looked incredible. If it wasn't for FromSoftware's hardness, it would be right up my street. The ideal game for a nerd like me. I had no choice but to not care about its existence. Skipped through many podcasts discussing theories and hopes for hours and hours and hours. roll my eyes at the fans clamoring to call it the best game of the decade before it had even come out. The hype machine was a dagger in the heart of someone who wanted to be a part of it, but knew they couldn't because FromSoft games just aren't for them. This continued until February 2022, when it was officially released. I started to hear that it was different. It wasn't a typical FromSoft game. How could this be? It has systems to make it more manageable, a path that isn't linear, generous checkpoints, where if you hit a wall, hey, don't worry about it, go find another wall. The game even has in-game tools like summoning spirits to take the edge off. Things die-hard FromSoft fans can totally ignore if they want to. And the people who had wanted to gatekeep FromSoftware games were happy. A masterpiece was the cry, all round, forgiving things like the clunky interface. FromSoftware had managed to make a game that die-hard FromSoft fans still loved, but had enough systems for people like me. When I saw this and watched girlfriend reviews play it for a bit, my curiosity was piqued. The ideal fantasy RPG, basically designed to meet my tastes with systems to make it palatable for me to take a punt. 100 some hours later, after rinsing almost every quest, killing almost every boss, I beat the final boss with a bubble gun, and I had done it. I had finally enjoyed a FromSoftware game fully, and I wasn't alone. Elden Ring sold 20 million copies in less than a year. The next highest sales figure, as far as I'm aware, is Dark Souls 3, which sold 10 million in 4 years. FromSoftware had proven just how good at their jobs they are, despite some of the estimations by their fans, in accepting the masses into their almost certainly grafted bosom. Their approach was accepted by both FromSoftware fans and filthy casuals like me. The game was heralded as a 10 out of 10 Game of the Year by the very same people who had rallied against the idea of changing the formula or adding systems. That's not the end of the story though. Not only had FromSoftware managed to have their cake and eat it, there's now a whole host of people whose first full FromSoft game was Elden Ring, and in beating it, they've stepped into other games. I have now revisited and beaten Dark Souls. Prepare to die? No thank you. I am not interested in boulders today. Darn it. Begrudgingly, I've beaten Dark Souls 2. And I loved beating Sekiro. I win! I win! And I'm looking forward to starting Dark Souls 3. The gates are wide open, as they should be, because their success gives them more power to make greater things. Here's to another 30 years of FromSoftware greatness.